All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm delighted to have Father Tim Deely. Am I saying your last name right, Father?
That's correct.
Deely, okay, with us today. And Father Tim, like what? Now, we've had the great pleasure of interviewing Deacon Rick, Father Joe, and Father Jeff so far. And so
saving the best for last.
That's right. I was thinking that. Number one, saving the best and most handsome for last. Let's see what the guys think of that, huh? So we'll have some fun with that. But now I think I may have asked you at one point a while back, but your background is Irish, is that right? Is your family was Irish, or I got that all messed up?
Yeah, no, so 3/4 Irish and 1/4 Hungarian.
Oh, very nice. And so what we're doing in these sessions is it's called Getting to Know Your Clergy and Your Faith. So we just find out about your background and then some of your thoughts and philosophies and recommendations as far as faith goes. But what were what's your story? Where are you from? Are you from the Pittsburgh area or from somewhere else? What's that all about?
Yeah, so I grew up right in Greenfield, right in the city, right across from St. Rosalia's in Greenfield. Yeah. And so, old family house. My dad grew up there. His grandfather built the house. So kind of deep roots there in Greenfield. And then for college, I went up to Boston. I went to BC and then stayed up in New England. I was a high school teacher up in Providence, Rhode Island for 10 years. So most of my adult life was in New England. But then for the seminary, I moved back to Pittsburgh, back home. And I was here for a year. I was in DC for 5 years. And then for ordination, came back home to Pittsburgh. So.
Wow. So I didn't realize. So high school. So you were now. Are you considered late to the priesthood because you work somewhere else, or is that just you're like the adjunct professor, got a lot more credibility because you've lived in the real world for a while, or what's this?
Hopefully, yeah. No, it's been. I think back in the day, guys would go in in high school or in college, and some people still do. I think Father Jeff did that. So there's a significant portion of people in seminary who go in right after high school or right after college. But I would say about half of the guys nowadays were sort of more in my situation. I was a little bit older, but there were even some guys, older than me in their 40s and 50s who had lived in the world, who had different professions. And so, there's benefits to both. But I found, from my own experience, especially teaching, and just life experience, that there's something that can be brought to the priesthood, from having lived personally some of these things.
So I bet. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here, but if you're talking about with parents and kids or teenage kids, what level of grade did you teach?
So it was a all boys high school, about 1,000 boys, Catholic school. So I taught every year, but seniors. So I always had sophomores, sometimes freshmen, sometimes.
All right, so that's sometimes difficult times for parents. I bet you have a lot of good stories because boys that age, as I recall, do a lot of burping and so forth. I guess maybe burp the alphabet and whatever. Even my daughters can burp the alphabet. She likes doing that. So
they're hilarious stuff. I mean, those guys are very funny. In the parent-teacher conferences, they come in and just be like, "So, what did he do?" I was like, "Your kid's hilarious. I mean, he's lost his mind half the time, but he's a good kid." Just kids that age, especially sophomores, there's a silliness that's very funny to them.
That's great. So now, what happened? After the 10 years, you just woke up one day, and said, "Okay, I've had enough. Time to become a priest," or because if it's an all-boys school, I guess there were a lot of brothers there and so forth, right? Or
there were the first few years. There were the Irish Christian Brothers, but the school was owned by the diocese, so the priests were from the Diocese of Providence there. But I loved teaching. I really, really enjoyed it. So I wasn't kind of tired of it. It was kind of a big decision to leave it because I really enjoyed the teaching of the kids. My colleagues were great, a lot of good friends there. So it was more just the priesthood was something I always thought of. And it seemed like it was time to kind of make a decision about that. I like teaching a lot, but I never had a good answer for, even in high school or college, people would say well, what do you want to do with your life? And I hated that question just because I really never had a great answer to it. Like, there was nothing I was super passionate about. And teaching was great, but in terms of like long term, I'm like, am I going to do this for 20 or 30 years? So I tried to avoid the priesthood thing for a long time, but it was sort of always in the background there. And I think deep down, I always sort of knew this is where I would hopefully end up. And it worked out.
Yeah, I've heard other priests say that it was like a dog was chasing them. Eventually, they had to give up. The dog like tackled it, started licking them or whatever.
That's true.
Now, what were the subjects with technical, or they were humanities, or what type of subjects?
Yeah, technical things not my strong point. So it was all humanities stuff. It was theology, scripture, moral theology, history of the church, Western Civ. So I taught a combination of those. Okay,
so when you went into the priesthood, were you like giving lectures to the people teaching the classes? Because I mean, for crying out loud, you probably went so deep in some of these topics they didn't even know about.
It was good. I had a really good prep. The thing is, they say, when you teach something, you learn it really well. And so I had the privilege of the opportunity to kind of do that. So my professors were very good. I was down at Catholic University of America, but there were a couple of classes where I was like, can I just take the test and maybe skip this one and take something else? I was lucky enough to, be able to study these things and have the time to kind of sort through them. So I had a little bit of a leg up on some of the guys who, had maybe never taken philosophy, or, that can be a little bit of a tough, it's a different way of using your mind. If you're an accountant or a lawyer or something like that, it can be a little tough transition.
Exactly. Now, so obviously teaching is not only your passion and your skill. How have you applied that in your ministry work? Of course, we got the sermons, right? So get your notebooks out or whatever, I guess, or whatever, run the whiteboard or whatever. But seriously, are there ways you've been able to kind of leverage that?
Yeah, I think teaching was a great preparation. Not just like the practical skill of speaking publicly, which is a tough thing. And it's not something it's intimidating at first. I think it's that Malcolm Gladwell book, The Tipping Point, which was, he has this thing in there about like 10,000 hours, like the Beatles practiced, 10,000 hours and they became the best. And he has other examples, but, I taught 45 minutes a period for 6 periods a day for 180 days for 10 years. So there was a lot of time sort of talking in front of people. And so there's the actual skill of like giving a public speech or a lecture. But a lot of it is just, and I had good mentors, a lot of it was just becoming comfortable with yourself. Some people try, and preachers will do this too, they try to be something that they're not. It's not genuine. And so they're imitating somebody. They're just not themselves. And the gospel is an authentic thing, like, in teaching. And it's got to be shared authentically. The saints are the most themselves. They're not trying to be someone else. They're who they are. We're all pretty unique. And so one of the, I think the benefits I found of teaching was just not just being public, but being myself in a public way. The priest is, our lives are very public, pretty much everything we do. So just to be comfortable with that and to be just honest and open about, who I am and what I'm doing. So that was, I think, a benefit there.
That's really cool. I'm trying to do the math in my head, and it seems like you've gotten over those 10,000 hours pretty quickly.
Did I? Oh, good. Yeah. I never actually added it up.
But and I do a little faculty work, adjunct work, and I'm exhausted after 2 or 3 hours. I don't know how these teachers do it, 8, 10, whatever, all day long, and then they do things in the evenings. That's exhausting. It must have been.
Each year it was sort of like getting in shape. Like the first couple of weeks, you just be beat, but then you kind of get into the rhythm of it, and it's exciting. There's a very immediate kind of not success. There's an immediate kind of like result that you see with teaching. Like a kid got it, or the discussion was good that day. Then there are other days where you're like, I don't think they've listened to a thing I've said the entire year. So it does balance itself out.
Have you had many students circle back with you some years later, let you know how they're doing or what's going on in their lives or anything?
I have. I mean, most of them are in Rhode Island, so it's, usually like an email or something on Facebook. Yeah, it's nice to see. I think my dad told me once, teaching is sort of like planting seeds. You may not see the results, but there are a few, kids who have come back or I've run into over the years, and then it's just cool to see them as adults and just be like, all right, like things turned out pretty well. You're doing well. And the time that you spend in the school with me, with the other teachers, seem to help you to grow into a good and decent man, and hopefully a good Christian as well.
Well, fortunately for all of us, we don't seem to stay the same. So always hope, right? So I'm also trying to do the math in my head. By the time you got done with college, taught for 10 years, then you did your, I guess what do you call it, seminary in Washington, D.C. at Catholic University. Like how long have you been a priest then? Like, is it?
So I was just ordained last year, June, so
okay,
2019.
Okay, so you're just coming out. Wow. So one of the questions I asked Father Jeff, I want to ask you the same one, was, you thought about it and all of this work getting ready for it, and then it actually happens. Like, was it the same, a letdown, different? What's it been like?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, I found it, so like with anything new, there is a lot of, just a lot of stuff that you don't know starting out, things you maybe never thought of, or there's a big learning curve, because it's not just that you're doing different things, you kind of are different. Like the priest is sort of set aside in a different way, so it's not so much like going to the funeral home or anointing someone who's dying, and those are new experiences, but it's just the sort of that I am myself, but I'm also not. Like, the priest is a sort of role, it's an office. So, just people look to you for help. They look to you to pray for whatever it may be. They look for advice. So
you just kind of, I know maybe it's more like a dial, but it seems like before you're doing all this preparation, and then a switch goes on, and now it's like I got all this extra stuff I'm responsible for. I kind of didn't really understand that well.
Yeah, it's like you can prepare, but until you actually do it, it's like a craft, like anything else. You can read any number of books about playing basketball, but until you go and actually are on the court, you can't really get a sense for the rhythm of the game and that kind of thing.
Right.
So that was one aspect of it. The other part was I felt very well prepared. I have good friends who have been priests for years. I've known priests my entire life. So a lot of like the rhythm of priestly life, or like good practices, bad practices, I had sort of had friends who have gone through that, or priests had told me that. So there wasn't a whole lot that was like super surprising. But again, it was just sort of, I was now the one doing it. I wasn't hearing about it.
Right. Well, so you've been going for about a year. How are you kind of growing into your role? Of course you got the mass and the other sacraments and so forth, but I don't know, I don't know if you're doing retreats and things like that, but what's the high stuff or the really fun stuff that you've been kind of able to do so far?
Yeah, obviously the sacraments are the big thing. The mass, confessions, baptisms are always great. Weddings, just to be a part of that day for people it's a privilege. So those are the sort of the obvious high points, but a lot of it is just the day-to-day stuff that's very enjoyable. Just meeting with people, or going to pray with someone, going and doing an anointing, planning stuff on different ways to teach the faith. So it's been, I would say, very exciting overall. The COVID and the quarantine was a little bit of a monkey wrench there. Just, it never happened. We were basically entirely shut down. So that was, I would say, extremely frustrating.
Right. Well, I know there's so many things that I'm learning about, at least in our cluster, that are going on with adding, masses or adorations or all just kind of ways to get people engaged. But it does seem like, once the shutdown happened, and I think that was, this happens with a lot of businesses, then all of a sudden, like the wind gets knocked out of the sails, and then people learn how to do other things. And as I call it, they like to go to Saint Mattress now rather than Saint whatever, right? So,
Yeah.
What's the path? What do you think it takes to re-engage people and get them coming back and doing things? And what are like, I don't know if you're working on it personally or as a group or as a diocese, what's happening there?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I mean, because it's not just the COVID. The whole context is quite complicated, and I think people have been alienated from the faith for a lot of different reasons. Part of it was just like the attachment wasn't there. Maybe they weren't taught as well as previous generations. The rhythm of life is different, like the old thing of the parish being the center of the neighborhood. If you're out in the suburbs or, you're only there once a week, it doesn't have that same hold. The culture is different. But then the church too, like the grand jury report, all the abuse scandals. Like I was in Boston when all that broke in 2002. So that's just been a part of my life since, my entire adult life. But just the deep scandal, the lack of trust, people were already leaving, I guess, is kind of my point. And once trust is broken, that's tough to regain. And then with the mergers, people are losing their home parishes. They're more attached to, their church than to, the diocese is kind of a vague concept for a lot of people. And so then into that context, a complete shutdown because of COVID happens. So I think just kind of being honest and open about what's gone on can't hurt, I don't think. And I think, you have to separate good from evil. And you got to separate the things that are part of the church and things that should never have been part of the church. And just to sort of preach the gospel, because we believe it's not just us, like the Lord's doing stuff, the Holy Spirit. So just to be authentic and authentically Catholic and to present things that are meeting people where they are and hopefully like giving them like a vision of like what life could be or should be. And hopefully that's appealing. And that comes through in the liturgy, that comes through in, whatever groups we're having. But just to try and present the faith and see, it works in every age. The faith is appealing because it's kind of what we're made for. So just to try and get out of the way as much as possible and let the Lord do his own work.
So like when you say authentic, can you explain that a little bit, and what would be inauthentic versus authentic that you're talking about? Because the reason I say that is one of the things I like to do is I like to get involved with music. And my whole life I've had the pleasure of being in a folk group. I actually learned how to play guitar when I was a kid in a church folk group, and we've had one going for a while. But I go to some of these other churches and I want to pull my hair out. And I just tell like, why don't you quit singing? That sounds horrible. That sounds like some, I don't know, goat screeching or something like that. It doesn't seem real. But so I kind of have an image of that in my head. But what do you mean by authentic versus inauthentic? What would be some examples people could see for that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is like holiness versus hypocrisy. So like on the deepest level, like are we really living the Christian faith, or is it just some kind of veneer? Something that we say and then do the exact opposite. And that's true for the laity, that's true for priests, that's true for bishops. We have to really be holy. Otherwise we're hypocritical. And so I think like what I meant by authentic in that sense is like the way things operate, the way people are treated, the way, we go about our daily business has to be authentic. It has to be the gospel. It can't be hypocritical. So that would be the first thing. And then the second thing is like in terms of like the content of the faith or like the liturgy, those kind of things. Just that things should be beautiful and they should be true and they should be good. So if they're I don't want to say that word, if they're less than that, then there's something inauthentic about it. It's not really the fullness of the faith. It's like a lesser version of it, and we can do better.
Right, and I suspect people can sense out pretty quickly when something doesn't seem genuine, or they talk a great game and then nothing happens, or they say,
Right.
hey, you should eat right, and then they go, pig out every night themselves or whatever, that kind of stuff.
That was another benefit of teaching. It just, the kids especially were very good at, they could tell if you were genuine or not. And I think most people are like that. You get a good sense, I don't really trust that person. Right.
Has it been, one of the things that's interesting to me, is it hard as a priest, you're talking about people trusting you, but what about the reverse? Is it hard for you to trust like your congregation and your members? Or, I don't know how you do it. There's gonna be a lot of wacky people just coming up with stupid stuff all the time. And I'm afraid I would say some stuff pretty quickly. It probably wouldn't go over too well, but I don't know. Is there like this guarded thing you have to be all the time, or how do you, how do you kind of trust the congregation, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm by nature a very trusting person, so I haven't found that to be a problem for me. My problem would probably be more on the other end of being too gullible. But yeah, no, I think there's a certain, it's not guardedness, but just sort of like prudence about like, okay, well, everyone's coming from a different perspective, and sometimes, you can't please everybody, so that's part of it. And sometimes, things will have to be done that, and not everyone's going to be pleased with. So just being okay with that, as long as it's, the right decision has been prayed over or whatever. But doing your best to try to, not alienate people, make, as much as possible, everyone happy. And just realizing sometimes it's not possible, but a lot of times it is. So I don't know. I think trust is an important thing. It's got to be earned, but it's also got to be like our first foot forward should be trust rather than mistrust. So I would rather lead with that than to lead with coming in and just being suspicious of everybody. That's not who I am, but also I don't think that's a good way to go about things.
Right. Well, it's fascinating to me that not only are you getting your ministry started, who knows how long we have, but if you're here for a number of years, this is the early part, right? But it's also like, seems to be such an incredible challenge keeping these churches filled and organized, and they got all of the, as you were saying, the reconfiguring and consolidation. And I don't know, I go to other parts of the country, and I spent some time growing up in Oklahoma. They had 3% Catholic there. So what we have, 3 or 4 churches in a big city, so it wasn't a big deal. Everybody had to go, they didn't have a lot. Here they got 3 or 4 on every block, it seems like. Every nationality built their own church. Or one time I lived in the South Side when I first moved there, there were 7 or 8 active Catholic churches in the flats and on the hills. I'm like,
yeah,
I'd walk past 2 or 3 to get to the one I was going to, then of course they had to close those. But what do you see as some of the big challenges, or especially as you think about our cluster? What if you had to say, okay, here's 3 things we got to work on or we got to pay attention to, what would they be?
Yeah, I think part of it is just having people be comfortable and coming back to church, for whatever reason that they've been away, whether it was COVID related or scandal related, or just had never really been to church, So I think that would be the big thing of just kind of reaching out to not just the people who come, but the people who just live in the neighborhoods who may never have tried Sacred Heart or Assumption or St. John Newman. So just to kind of reach out that way.
So that's number one, but how are you, sorry to interrupt, but how are you trying to do that? Or what would be some ways? Are you like, it's going to go start knocking on doors or go to community picnics, or I don't know. I suggested to Father Joe, and as soon as I get a little construction finished on the house, I said, we'll have a neighborhood party. I'll invite everybody I know that used to be members, and we'll see who shows up. So he said, well, okay, well, I think it'd be the beer that'd get them over there, the beer and the wine, but chance to interact. But what are some, anything that's worked before you've seen or from your other priests or anything like that works?
I mean, I think being present and being visible is very important. So, like Pope Francis is always saying, like, you got to get out of the rectory, you got to get out of the sacristy and kind of hit the streets. So I think just being visible in the community, whether it's, walking around or driving around, waving to people, but, more practically just, there's the internet presence, which is a big thing for people, but also I think, mailings, in a way, a kind of door-to-door thing. You can't really do that now. People will be uncomfortable, but, going to the coffee shops, just the supermarkets, different community events, Bellevue and Emsworth, they have, all these parades, or at least we did last year, so just you're at the Halloween parade, or, you're walking around the park, you're at the library. I think part of it is just, it doesn't have to be super programmatic, although there should be an organized kind of program about it. But yeah, there's a community event, you show up,
so
you talk to people.
So where are you stationed right now? What are you in one of the, like, where's your home sleeping quarters or whatever?
So yeah, I live in Bellevue at the rectory at Assumption.
Oh, okay. And
yeah.
So have you been across the street to the Lincoln Avenue Brewery yet?
I did, yeah. I started last July, and I think that weekend I got here was like their soft opening. So my parents and I stopped in there. So I've been a few times. I would get food from there during the quarantine and just walk across the parking lot and get a hot meal. So it was good.
Very cool. One of my good friends started that, and it's just, this shutdown is really tough. But so, all right, we see you walking around downtown Bellevue there. That'd be pretty cool to have that going on. All right, well, that makes a lot of sense. So one of the things you were saying was about being open. Are there other and visible? Are there other things like trying to re-engage folks and get them to come back, and that you think would be good approaches or things you've been thinking about or trying?
Yeah, I think, because of this was true before COVID, but just everyone's online all the time. So really beefing up like the websites and really social media presence, short little videos, everyone's just on video now. Writing is a little passe. So just finding ways to connect where people are, and people are on Instagram and Facebook, and we're not doing TikTok, but there's just to go where people are. And if they're online, then we got to go online as well.
And have you been doing much of that, or what's been happening there?
We've started, we did the streaming every day, I think every day since March 25th of the Mass. But we've been trying to do more, and this is just in the last 2 weeks, with the different Facebook pages and web pages, little just video introductions, invitations to events. We're going to try and do a little more like short segments of teaching on there. If people aren't comfortable coming back yet, or they need an invitation, this could be a nice way to do that.
So it's basically just getting yourself seen and be available, what have you. And go.
Right. And if I could be off the internet, that would be fantastic. It's not something that, I don't like being that, public presence on the internet, but it's important to do. So, and I know the other two guys kind of share that too. It's not like, we're out there for fame or followers or something. But it's like, well, we have to go where the people are. So everyone's online, so we'll go online.
Right. It can be very difficult to.
I realize we're online now, so this this is not a criticism of being online.
Yeah. Well. And they've. I guess the idea is hopefully some folks will see some of these, and hear a little more in depth. So you mentioned, I forgot to ask you. You said you were from Greenfield. Any brothers or sisters that were around when you were growing up, or is it just you, or what? Yeah.
So I'm the oldest. I have 3 younger sisters. Nice. So one's still in Pittsburgh, one's in New York, one's in Cleveland.
Okay, and did you, Greenfield is Alderdice Dragon territory. Were you, your high school was Alderdice or somewhere else, or where did you go for high school?
So for high school, I was homeschooled, but Alderdice would have been my public high school, yeah. My cousins were there. And, Yeah, we practiced baseball there and stuff. But yeah, no, I wasn't a Dragon.
Okay.
Central was always my big dream, so I would have been a Viking.
All right, sounds cool. What are when you think of kind of your favorite things to teach or preach about as far as the faith goes? Let's share one of those or two of those with folks. What's something you're really passionate about there?
I always like the saints. They're fascinating, and they're also different. Not just lived in different times and places, but they come from like all backgrounds. So you have, uneducated peasants, you have kings and queens, you have bookish people, you have adventurers, you have introverts, extroverts, people with a sense of humor, people with no sense of humor. There's just a vast variety of different types of people, and the saints are just great examples of that. And I just find their lives fascinating, like how the Lord worked in like a unique relationship with this person and what they did in their life to kind of follow him. And yeah, I just find it interesting. And so like those little stories of the saints, I just personally like them. And I think, people like hearing about the saints.
How do you
They're
find
just interesting.
Is there, you get books about them or read about them online, or how do you research a saint or learn about it, or so
there are books. Butler's Lives of the Saints is probably the most famous of them. But with the web, there's so many good things, and to be honest, Wikipedia is pretty good. I think in the early days it was not quite accurate, but right now it's pretty good. The Catholic Encyclopedia that's online at New Advent, they have good biographies of the saints. There's a website called Catholic Culture that has like the readings of the day, the saints of the day. So normally those are like my go-tos.
Okay, and did you, so when you're using or reading them, it sounds like, hey, they show up in a homily or a teaching message or something, because they're great examples, as you were saying, to relate to people. But if you had to look across, like, let's say top 5 saints or whatever, it's kind of, I'm always fascinated by this. Like they say, if you look at really super successful people, regardless of their field, what do they do? And with my students, I always tell them, they decide what they want and they write it down. In other words, they're pretty focused on goal setting. But have you ever thought about that? Like, what are the traits of these saints, regardless of whether they were the king or the pauper or whatever? Is there anything like that?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think for me, there's a certain, for me, it's always the pre-saints that I liked the best. Or like Saint Therese of Lisieux, like the contemplative sister, the contemplative nuns. But yeah, in terms of traits, like humility is just the biggest one. They're all really humble, not like in a way that's unhealthy, psychologically or anything. They're not like beating themselves up, but there's just a real sense that like they're really following the Lord. He's the primary relationship in their life, and they have the same relationship with him that everyone else does. So why not treat other people the way the Lord would treat me? Or it's like the Mother Teresa thing. Where do you see the face of Jesus? She's like, whoever's right in front of me. I didn't understand that for a long time, but just seeing like the saints treat other people like they really live the gospel, like love others as I have loved you. And they kind of put that into practice. And a lot of that is just like taking a step back from, because our nature is always trying to like push us. Like pride is a real thing. So just the kind of foundation of how they interact with everyone, how they see themselves, how they see other people, is not through the lens of like selfishness. It's through the lens of kind of like self-giving love. And they put that into practice like in very small ways, but in very beautiful ways. So that would be like across the board one of those qualities that I find really attractive in the saints.
That sounds like it'd be a fascinating topic for one of your video presentations or things you're doing, like five ways to live humility or whatever. That's probably pretty
That's a good idea.
thought-provoking.
I can write that down.
Okay, we'll see that later this week or something. Maybe I'm gonna give your videos.
Yeah.
Well, that was one. Are there any others from the saints that, besides humility, that's another trait you've thought about or that you've seen?
Yeah, I think courage is a big one. There's not just like the initial following of the Lord, but there's always like these decision points that come up in their lives where sometimes it's like, am I going to go this way or that way? Other times it's some kind of disaster or suffering or persecution. And they're kind of tenacious in the, sometimes it's these grand actions. Other times it's just like, I took vows and I'm going to live them out like day by day. So there's a real like fighting kind of tenacious courage that I think they all have. Again, it's expressed in different ways, but yeah, they're not sort of passively going along with life. They're kind of fighting for holiness, they're fighting for other people, they're fighting for the Lord. And it takes a lot of courage to do that, I think.
Very cool. I remember, I don't know if this is accurate, but I remember being told or reading about it that Pope John Paul II, whenever he would see his bishops and stuff, a lot of times that's the only word he would say is courage.
Oh, really?
To encourage him. Yeah, so I thought, at least I remember that in my mind. If it's,
I like that.
I don't know if it's accurate or not, but was I thought pretty profound. Well, so humility, courage. Anything else that's another favorite topic you love to present on, or it's like, oh, I'm gonna have a great sermon today or whatever because we got the A game coming or whatever.
I like history, so stuff from the Old Testament, the kings of Israel, the prophets. I really just enjoy. I just find it neat. So I also enjoy talking about what was going on in ancient Israel at the time. Why did the prophet do this? Or why does the Psalm say that? So just to give some kind of context to it, it really helps the scriptures make a lot more sense when you can understand, like, oh, this is what was going on. They were in Egypt, or the king was corrupt, or whatever it is.
Right. It's even, I don't know if you've seen on Netflix, but I stumbled into this the other day. They have each of the Gospels read verbatim, but acted out.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, and it's like, oh, is that when that story comes? He's like in this, it's like, that makes sense. We got a little context now. So
right, because the way they're presented at Mass, or even like the way the Bible's laid out, it's not quite in sequence. And so just to have a basic timeline of like, where are we and what's going on?
Right.
It's just very helpful, I think.
Do you find from the history that you're reading in the times and so forth, is that analogous to things that people are struggling with today or up against, or is it measurably different in many ways?
I think, we're all human beings and human nature doesn't change that much. So the things that, King David went through with, sin and repentance, or trusting in God, or celebrating some great victory, that's the way that he related to God is very similar to the way that you and I experience life and hopefully relate to God. Now it's different because of Jesus. That's a whole different game changer. But I think that's why the scriptures are sort of enduringly important, and they're from God, but they speak to the human being. Down through the centuries, every generation, the scriptures come alive again. And when people encounter them, it's a real encounter with God, and it speaks to people. It changes lives. It's a really neat thing. And then, that's sort of one aspect of it. But the other thing is, God does sort of deal with us differently in every age. So there's a lot of stuff in the Old Testament, the way God deals with people doesn't do that now. Which I think is a mistake some Christians make, where they're sort of like combing the Old Testament for exact, correlation between like, okay, we had an earthquake. There was an earthquake back then. This must be from God. It's like, well, God doesn't really work that way anymore.
So God's changed over time.
Not that he's changed, but the way he's interacted with us has changed. Almost like, like with a kid or something, you would explain things very simply early on to a younger child. And then as they grow up, you can have a more detailed conversation. So like, the kid goes to reach for the stove, you just sort of shout at them and maybe grab their hand so they don't do it. Whereas, later on, if you're talking to like a 20-year-old who's still going to go burn his hand on the stove, you're like, hey man, come on, don't.
So are you saying that the way the Old Testament is written is more like the younger kid as it progresses through the books? That's fascinating.
I think so, yeah. Even through the Old Testament, like, God does these grand gestures, good and bad, much earlier on. And even as, he kind of goes dark for a little while. Like the last prophet is, 300 or 400 years before Jesus. So he's not only not doing all these miracles and like intervening so directly in their history, but he kind of hides for a little while. And then Jesus shows up, and there's again this sort of these grand gestures. But then, after the apostles, there's miracles from time to time, but he's gonna teach us and be with us in like a more subtle way. It'll be through the sacraments, through the scriptures, through the teaching of the church. So he doesn't need these sort of grand historical gestures like he did maybe in the past. I don't think any of this is heretical, but now that I'm thinking through it, I hope I'm right.
Okay, but I just for our purposes, try to understand your point is, so in our lives today, if I follow your model, it should be less about, okay, there's going to be like this rock drop out of the sky and fall right in front of me and tell me what to do. I'm going to have to be paying a little bit more attention and look for the more subtler, simpler clues. Would that be a fair statement or not?
Yeah, I think so. Like Christ says, like, be as innocent as doves and as wise as serpents. So we're supposed to use our minds, and God has a lot of avenues to interact with us now, like through the scriptures, through the mass, through the sacraments, through the teachings of the church. He didn't have any of that in the old days, so he did have to teach differently, maybe a little more dramatically. But yeah, it's there for us to figure out and to explore. But I think, sometimes people can get impatient, and it's understandable that God just tell me what to do. Sometimes he does, but a lot of times it's a kind of process of discernment, of figuring it out.
Right. One thing I'm wondering with the teaching you used to do and the kind of philosophy, and you kind of got that trick. So you had to run into Aristotle and Plato and Western civilization at some point, right? A lot of what our stuff is based on. And when I was in graduate school, I took a course from this one professor. He was Greek, and his theory was that Jesus was a rhetorician. And I said, "Oh, brother, this guy, whatever. What are we talking about here?" And he said, "Well, what's the first line? I think it's John's Gospel, which is, in the beginning was the Word." And then his whole class was on logos, which is the power of the word. And today we call that branding or whatever, what you decide to call something or whatever. It changes everybody's feelings and emotions and psyche about it. But have you ever thought too much about that? Are those two worlds so totally disconnected from each other, or can one inform the other? And they're like kind of philosophy insights that help with the biblical, or vice versa, or how does that play together?
Yeah, that's a big thing, I think. As Catholics, like, the faith is not something that's different than human wisdom. And all philosophy is like an exploration of how we know things and what's real, like what's reality like. There's more accurate versions of that than some are better than others. They get a more comprehensive or penetrating kind of insight. So I think what the church does, and they did this with Plato, they did this with Aristotle, some of the others, that they took these insights. They're like, okay, well, that's true. Human beings figured this out on their own. This is great. And what the faith does is just builds on that. It does surpass it, but it never undermines it. That's a big thing. And so there are different versions of Christianity that kind of do that. Some of the other religions say, like, you have to stop thinking for yourself and you need to accept what we're telling you based on faith or trust. That's never been the Catholic thing, and that always becomes super dangerous when religious people act that way. So philosophy's been very important, and just like, you know, this comes in with science too. Like, most of the great scientists in Western civilization have been either monks or priests, because there was this real understanding that, like, we're supposed to figure things out, and, you know, part of that is figuring out the world, figuring out ourselves, and so that's, I think, a really important thing, especially for Catholics, especially for religious people, to just be interested and to be diligent about figuring out what the world's like. And through that, we'll figure out God too. And there'll be stuff that comes to us that he reveals, but it's never going to, like, trump, it's never going to do away with what we can know on our own.
Right. As you're talking, I'm thinking it's like somebody else invented a shovel. We can use that to dig a hole or put a fence in or whatever we're going to do. We don't need to reinvent the shovel. So it's like, take from what's been built, but apply it to what you need to apply it to.
Right. And Jesus kind of does that too. Like, you know, he's using Hebrew concepts, but Greek concepts. You know, he's using the structure of the Latin or the Roman government. St. Paul does this brilliantly. You know, he goes into Greece and he's well trained in Greek rhetoric and Greek philosophy. And so there's a lot of overlapping points there with the truth of the faith and the truth of philosophy, the truth of science.
That's very cool. Well, I know you've been so generous with your time. One last suggestion or comment for all the folks of our grouping, anything that you say, hey, above all else, or this is the bottom line, here's the key takeaway. What's that before we let you get back to your busy day?
Yeah, I think the faith is, we've been talking sort of academically, I guess, but the faith is something very simple. It's God loves us and we love God back. And that should be the first thing about our lives. That should be like the major thing. That doesn't mean that you live like a hermit on the top of a mountain. It's a practical kind of everyday thing. You love your family, you're patient, you're a just person, honest. But it goes beyond that, because it's not just like a code, it's a relationship with God, who's, you know, Jesus Christ. And he's really close to us if we want him to be. And so life can become this kind of beautiful adventure that has suffering in it, that has, you know, real joy. But it's a very beautiful kind of thing. And that's something that if you haven't tried, try it out. And, you know, if it doesn't work, fine. But the Lord comes through. So
could be the best love affair of your life, it sounds like. Wow.
You said that on me, but yeah.
All right. Well, my understanding. Well, Father Tim, it's been great to hang out with you today. And
Lloyd, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Share a little bit of things. So, all right. Well, until next time, we'll see you around the block and maybe over at the brewery or something one night or whatever. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for spending time with us. Okay.
Right on. Bye-bye.
Bye.